Okay, this is going to be a bit of a different kind of video today. Sit on the floor. I'm here in my fabulous daughter's sunroom, daughter's sunroom, and I want to talk about blanket training. Somebody contacted me today and said, would I explain and show in detail what blanket training is? Blanket training, as you saw it on Shiny Happy People, and it was just showed just the tiniest bit, and they didn't discuss all of the painful realities of blanket training and the pearls. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm also going to link in the description a video that Michael Pearl did in which he has a rod of some sort. He's wailing the hell out of a doll that looks like a child. I found that so incredibly disturbing that the person that wanted this just said, would you use a doll or a stuffed animal and show us what it is? I can't do that. I'm too tender-hearted. If I were to do that, I would be crying. Okay, so today I have this is our baby, a little pillow with lots of shiny sequins. And here is our child, Skeletor. So what is blanket training? I guess I should introduce myself first. I'm all ADD this morning because I'm not really fully awake yet. I'm Suzanne Tinkmeyer. I used to write a column called No Longer Quivering for over 10 years for a place called Pathos. I'm working on a book. I keep wavering back and forth on the title, A Far Place with Strange Fire, or just plain old with Strange Fire. And yesterday I spent the day with one of my former friends from church, and a lot of disturbing stuff came out for me, and I'm still processing and working on my book as a result. And this Duggar series has just been so incredibly triggering to myself and others. And I'm 17, almost 18 years out, okay? And it's still triggering to me. One of the most triggering things was that Michael Pearl video they showed like a millisecond of, where he had a rod. I don't know if he had a wooden rod or if he had a flexible piece of 1/4 inch plastic plumbing line. They called it in the video plumbing pipe. It's not. It's a flexible line, because a flexible line hurts a lot more than a pipe, believe it or not. That thing stings like crazy when you start beating somebody. So what is blanket training? Blanket training in its most simplest form is when you take a small child and you give them expectations as to what to expect, and you begin to gradually, quote, train them. Now, I hate that term because I'm folding this quilt I made that I'm going to use for the blanket. Like that fabric, it's cool. Because training is something you do with an animal. And I don't even like to use an animal thinking about that, but when I think about training, I think of animals. I think about training your dog to sit or to stay, or your cat to stay off the countertop. No one's ever been successful with that, but everybody tries. So this whole idea of training a child is just repulsive. When we were first going to our taco church, totalitarian, authoritative church organization, when we were first going there, it was shortly after my daughter had a life-threatening kind of incident with her platelets. She had ITP, idiopathic thrombocytic purpura, I think is how it's pronounced. Her platelets would just randomly die off, and we didn't know why. And she was in and out of the hospital with this thing, and she had chemical meningitis at one point too. So her and I were traumatized, and we're at this church. We're hugging onto each other hard, a lot. She was 4. I was in my 30s. We hadn't been there long, and someone handed me a copy of Michael Pearl's book. Michael Pearl runs No Greater Joy. And his entire ministry is on beat the child, beat the child, beat the child. So I read this book that advised me to whale the biscuits out of my child that had platelet problems. And I was like, no, I am not doing this. I'm not beating my child that has platelet problems because it would be deadly. And I could see from the beginning that there was a problem with this. So I was never a Pearl fan, even though there were a lot of people at our old church that had practiced this. I read that book and I threw it away. I didn't want it to fall in the hands of anybody else. When I got to Costa Rica, I saw some Pearl books in the church library. I spirited them away and barbecued them in the front yard because of the levels of toxicity at the Pearls. Don't believe me? Go look at their website. I'm going to put a link to their website. I'm going to put a link to the video where Michael Pearl has the big stuffed doll and he's just beating it, because I can't watch that video very long because the doll is life-sized. And just seeing him beat the doll is too disturbing, which is why I'm using pillows instead of dolls or stuffed animals. I can't even stand to beat an animal. I've only really reacted like that to animals when something over the top is going on. An example, one of my cats decided that he didn't like the fact that I was feeding him. I wasn't feeding him like he wanted and what he wanted. So he decided to attack my leg and he started biting the crap out of me, and I was pushing him away with my other foot. Now, I did have a commenter one time say, "Oh, you're cruel to your animals. I've seen you push them away." Um, I push them away. I pick them up and throw them in the cat carrier and stuff like that when needs be. There are going to be times when those things happen, but it's not a routine thing. It's not beating. It's not the Pearl way. And Michael Pearl extends this to animals. You'll see in his writings, he'll talk about beating this animal, beating the roosters up, kicking his dogs, kicking the cats, harming animals to make them obey. This is just his way. This is how he deals with it. And I know I am delaying because I'm dreading this. This is not something I want to do. Okay. So we have our blanket out, okay? We have our blanket. And what Michael Pearl says is when your child is under 6 months old, maybe to the 2 to 4 month old range, you put the blanket out. You take your lovely little baby and you sit it right in the middle of the pillow. This is the first part of child training, the Pearl method. You take a wooden spoon or a switch or the like, and you start beating. You beat all the way around the blanket. You don't beat the child, you beat the floor. And you do this every day, and you do it for 5 or 6 minutes. Now, you saw I only went around the blanket 3 times. I want you to think about what it would be like to hear that as a small baby for 5 or 6 minutes and to have this threat circling you. Think about that. The next step. The next step is to keep doing that, but then to lightly switch the baby some so that it starts to realize that this and this requires utter obedience. And if you don't have utter obedience, this is going to be this. Then, when the baby is 6 months old or a little older, you take something that the child loves, a stuffed animal or whatever, a toy, and you place it just off the blanket. Okay, I did not think to get a toy, so I'm going to have to grab something off the... Okay. So pretend this is a child's toy instead of what is this? Whoops. A Sony speaker. So you take this and you place it just beyond the blanket, just beyond the reach of the child. And when the child starts squirming, scuttling off towards that, You whip this out and you beat them. You hit them again. You hit them again. You hit them again. And every time that they don't lay there still and quiet and they try to get to this thing, you wail them. You wail them. You hit them. Michael Pearl dresses it up in language like, you switch them with the rod. But let's be real about what we're talking about here. We are not talking about gently switching somebody. We are talking about whacking the biscuits out of them over and over and over until they stop crying, until they lay quietly on the blanket, until they won't go anywhere near the item. They learn that to move on the blanket gets you this, gets you this. There is a scripture in Proverbs that talks about the bluest mark being a sign of obedience. So can you imagine what an implement like this would do to the tender and fragile flesh of a baby? I cannot. Well, I've seen it, but whenever I see a small child with those kind of marks, it's just heartbreaking and illegal. What Michael Pearl is talking about is illegal in many states. And most states are going to fine you for beating your child. So Michael ups the ante on all of this. The blanket training is just the very beginning of beating your child, wailing the biscuits out of them every time they roll their eyes, they have any kind of attitude, they don't answer you in a way that you want, then they get this. Now, Michael says you're not supposed to do it in anger, but I don't see any other way that you could. Don't get off the blanket. I remember when I was writing in LQ, somebody posted pictures of their grandchild and the spoon and the blanket and was gossiping about it. About 6 months ago, well, not gossiping, talking about what they did to train the child when the mother wasn't around. And I reposted that and said, this is reprehensible because this is what it is. And I got a removed content from the mother and said, oh no, everybody needs to see what it is your mother is doing to your children. So what happens when you no longer have this little baby, this cuddly little baby? Implements change. You can still use a wooden spoon, but Pearl likes to say use a flexible piece of plumbing line. I don't have a flexible piece of plumbing line, so my drink straw is going to have to substitute. Not a plumbing pipe like was seen in, mentioned in Happy Shiny People. They got that very wrong. It is not a plumbing pipe. It is, that stings. This hurts. This stings much worse. This tinier thing, this flexible thing stings a lot worse than this, the big spoon. Even though I think the big spoon would probably do more damage. This hurts worse. And I'm sure that's why Pearl came up with that, because it hurts worse. So you have your toddler. You have your toddler, and I know this is big for a toddler. You got your toddler. You got your, he's giving you some lip. You can tell from his body language, he's just awful. He's being naughty. So you start smacking him with this thing that stings really hard. You smack his legs. You smack his bottom. You smack the arms and legs and hands if you have to. This is the forbidden smacking zone, but I know of plenty of people that practice this Pearl thing that do that. Naughty attitude, that's a smacking. Roll your eyes, that's a smacking. And when I say a smacking, I am not saying you just tap them once with this thing. I am talking about repeatedly just doing this for 5 or 6 minutes. A lot harder than I'm doing it now. more like what I was doing with the spoon, for minutes on end until you, quote, break the child's will. And breaking the will, they define it as a child who starts crying with real repentance. Not a don't do that, I'm crying. Because you're beating the child with these things when they cry to make them stop crying too. So it's all very confusing, and that's why I want to do this demonstration, because blanket training does not really sound evil until you start whacking and you start realizing how many minutes. There is a Michael Pearl story at his website where he talks about training somebody's awful little screaming monster of a toddler. Toddlers are gonna be screaming monstrous little kids sometimes. Why? Because they're exploring their world. They're learning where the boundaries are. They are learning. They are learning and experimenting every day, and they have to have the freedom to do that without having themselves beaten, without having that spoon going out and whacking them, whacking them, whacking them. So Michael Pearl's story, these people brought their toddler to them, and at like 11 or 12 at night, Michael Pearl started driving the kid down the road because the child liked to cry in his car seat. Liked to cry in the car seat, and he would start crying and wailing, carrying on. I believe Michael said he stopped every 2 to 5 minutes and would start wailing the hell out of the child. He did this most of the night until he finally got the crying of repentance. And in families that practice this Michael Pearl stuff, they do it until the child is grown and out. Come over here and get your licks. They keep doing it until the child is 18 and out of the house. Please don't do this. If you're struggling to discipline your child, there are so many better ways to do it than to use physical force. The only thing you're teaching your child when you're doing these things is that the bigger person always wins and violence always works. That's all you're teaching them. You're teaching them that violence is good. That this is how people resolve issues, is with violence. And we wonder why there's school shootings and knifings and there's all this violence and bullying. I think it has its roots in how kids are treated from the very beginning. If you're treated like you have no value, if you're treated like the serf or the slave of somebody else and getting a whipping just because you roll your eyes, people are going to pick up some violence from this stuff, and it is going to bleed over into their entire lives. I believe you'll see a lot more spousal abuse, a lot more child abuse, all of that. It is a nasty, nasty plant with thorns that's just completely does these poisonous things. So don't do that. If you need help with your child, there are always parenting classes. Usually CPS runs those, or other community programs in your area. I'm a big fan of the Love and Logic books, and I'm going to link those below too. It's pretty much how I raise my children. You have logical consequences for everything. And what do I mean by that? Say, I'm going to give an example, a small example. Say you go out for ice cream with your family, okay? And everybody gets an ice cream cone. You're all standing there with your cones, getting ready to take licks, but you have a toddler son who's just foolish and silly, and he's dancing around and doing like this, and he drops his ice cream. There are 2 or 3 different thoughts of how to handle that. I know some parents say, "Oh, honey, let me get you another ice cream." I also know parents who will say stuff like, "Get over here and get your whipping for disobeying." With Love and Logic, if you see your child acting the fool and they do this thing and they drop it, instead of either one of those responses, what you say if you're trying to teach your child to have consequences is, "Oh, I am so sorry that you dropped your ice cream. I know how much you were looking forward to that and saying, you really shouldn't be dancing around with a cone because that sort of thing happens. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about allowing people to have consequences. Oh, I think I beat my straw too much. I see I got a little in there. Oh well. So that's what I mean by love and logic. That's exactly what they teach, how to handle your kids. It's a much better way in a lot of ways because you are showing the child that there are consequences to everything. You're not glossing over the consequences. You're not excusing what they're doing, and you are not harming them. You're not causing physical harm. One of the things that scares me the most about the Pearls books is they have been found in the households of families that beat their children to death. They've been literally found there. And there have been kids that have been abused to death. Once you start killing off muscle tissue by whacking your child, that damaged and dead muscle tissue breaks down and clogs the kidneys and causes kidney failure. I would say the word, but I know I would bobble it. Rhabdomyolysis. I don't know. I know that's not how it's said, probably, but when the kidneys start breaking down muscle tissue, they die. It clogs them. And so that's how some of these kids have been disciplined to death. Hannah Rose pops to mind. She was one of the ones that was disciplined to death, and that the Pearl book was found at her house. It's a wicked, wicked way to raise a child, and I think it's evil. I had a really long conversation with my bestie yesterday about the Bible, and she was carrying on over clamping about end times. Now, I'm not interested in end times at all. On the Book of Revelations, it is confusing. There's a lot of poetic language used. I don't think you can really pull anything from it and say, this is 100% what this means. This is what's going to happen. I don't believe you can do that. I also have come to the conclusion lately that a lot of Christians promote the word of Paul above the word of Jesus. May I never do that. I just cannot see Jesus using this to do this. I can't see it. I can see the Jesus that said, suffer little children to come unto me. I can see him doing that, not that. So don't do that. Please don't do that. I'm going to go. This is already an upsetting morning, and I'm going to try to finish watching the rest of the thing. It's really hard sometimes for me to even be with my bestie when she starts with her um, stuff. She had a really bad accident back in October, right around Halloween, and almost died. And she was crying yesterday and telling me that she kept asking God why, the why of why she had her accident, because she's always prayed Proverbs 31 over her, not 31, Psalm 91. I'm sorry, I'm very confused here this morning. As protection over herself, and she wanted to know why God did not protect her. She told me in her prayer time she got that it was the enemy doing it, that it was Satan who was coming to kill, steal, and destroy. I think that's a very childish way to look at these things. I used to believe that crap. I don't any longer. Things happen. We're broken and imperfect people. Who knows why these things happen? But blaming it on Satan is literally the childish thing to do. Just like beating the Satan out of your child is the wrong thing to do. Okay, I gotta go. I'm just rambling. I'm starting to ramble now. I love you guys. Don't beat your children. Please don't do it.